world headquarters of Pro Cannabis Media on the shores of the Lancaster Falls Pond in Clinton, Massachusetts. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media. So happy you're joining us on this absolutely beautiful Friday in the Northeast. I know if you're in the South or out West, it is still hot as hell. But you know what? I'm enjoying the fact that in New England, in the summertime, we get great days like the one we're having today. Now, we have a great program for you. We've lined up some really interesting people to talk to, probably at the very highest levels of legal expertise. And of course, we'll also have an active chat room. But joining me as my guest host for today's show is LeVanna Vassau. She knows California, so we wanted to bring her in. And I think we have a California attorney that we've asked to come on. But rather than name him and him not show up, and we'll feel bad about that, we'll just go with me and LeVanna for a few minutes and chit chat about what is going on in this crazy world of cannabis, because my goodness gracious, this week there must have been 20 stories involving the industry that could have a big effect on the future. And one is not only in, LeVanna she's got the Golden Gate Bridge behind her. Okay. So she's in the San Francisco Bay Area. Wink, wink. Actually, she's visiting Brooklyn now. And that's obviously on the East Coast. And New York is absolutely, totally, I don't know, screwed up. Is that a good way? They wanted to get it right so bad. They wanted to give the social equity applicants first crack at the licenses. They wanted to do everything right, and they've done everything wrong. It just
Did they though? I mean,
good point. Because I don't think there is a right or wrong when you're doing something for the first time. I'll give them that. Okay.
Well, I know, like from being at the CWCB Expo in 2022 and watching, the beginnings of it, and having the panel with Dashida Dawson and some people talking, I learned from that they spent a lot of money consulting with all the other states to do. I was very impressed to find out what went wrong in the other states and try to avoid what went wrong. There's really poor audio on it, but I did record that panel, a really interesting panel. It was Dashida Dawson and the head of the OCM.
Was Tremaine Wright on that panel? Tremaine Wright?
So Tremaine Wright, he's the guy from California, right?
No. I'm pretty sure that's the name of the Office of Cannabis Management Executive Director.
I don't know that he was on that panel, but there was two panels. There was them talking about the preparation and the educating and all the preparation they've done, and I was very impressed by that. And then there was another panel of enforcement from all of the states, also talking about what went wrong, as well as the guy from Weed Maps up there, which I thought had the most, that man has the most data of anybody. He's been working with the government, and he, his solution, which everyone should hear out, was like, that the industry just shouldn't be restricted. It's like he compared it to restricting, like, mechanics. Like, why would you restrict a mechanics in the area and everything like that? And
hang on a second. But mechanics were not prohibited from working for 86 years. They weren't vilified by the government and by the public. They weren't privy to misinformation, because that's what the biggest challenges are in this industry, is the people that are making the rules and the regulations just aren't listening to the people that have been in the industry for a long time. Or if they are listening, they still want to put their own little, John Hancock, if you will, little of their own in these regulations. And New York, you know this, LeVanna, they stopped issuing licenses. They went to court today. There's actually a result, and Jeffrey Hoffman from New York is going to be joining us at the bottom of this half hour. And we're going to get some up-to-the-minute breaking news from Jeffrey, because he'll give us the whole deal. And basically what they did was they put another 2-week moratorium on giving out licenses. So that's what we call cannabis standard time. You know, that one step forward, two steps backward. It's just natural.
Well, the other major restriction and the things I saw from like last year to this year at the CWCB Expo, and what I was going to say was the other panel about enforcement. The guy from California kept saying over and over again, once the cat's out of the bag with the black market and the black market is up and operating, it's really hard to get the cat back in the bag, right? And what was interesting to me to see at the CWCB Expo panel this year of all of the big canna guys speaking, they clearly had driven around the city and they were like, we're not touching this with a 10-foot pole right now. There's no way, because they know from California and the other markets, when the black market is this strong, they can't win. And that's why my opinion is, after watching this, being in California for legalization, you know, and I have a green MBA, so I look at everything with like an MBA eye. And having been, I operate on both the black market and the white market, because, you know, black market is what they call what we were for 20 years in California. And these markets aren't young. You know, New York wanted, you know, everyone wants a pattern I see with each new market, state market coming along, they all want to reinvent the wheel. And at this stage of things, you know, Colorado's been legal for 10 years. There's no need to constantly reinvent the wheel and hire. And then they look down on industry as much as they create equity programs and everything else. They consistently look down on the legacy market who's been there since day one and knows how to operate the business. All these legacy market people. And there's different types of legacy markets, and it's very different. California legacy market is really one of farmers and growers and cultivators, while the New York legacy market is one of sellers. So people who sold weed really consider themselves legacy here. Well, I don't know. Us Californians kind of look at that as like, you're just a middleman. You're not legacy.
Okay, so let's cut to the chase, because your attorney Freddy is here right now.
Welcome, Freddy,
and joining us. And Fred, is it Sayegh? Is that how we pronounce the last name?
It's sage, like the spice.
Sage. Oh, hard. Well, we call that a soft G. A soft G. Okay, I got you. Thank you so much for joining us. And you've heard LeVanna's opening monologue, if you will, about the state of California. The one thing I will lead into this discussion will be something that everybody in the cannabis industry, like a gentleman that has a kind of a controversial reputation. His name's Steve D'Angelo, but he always writes great pieces. And he says that California had it right when they had their medicinal program, and they've ruined it with the adult use. What's your feeling about that, just off the top?
Wow. So
yeah.
That's a great question. And I'd like to thank Jimmy and LeVanna for having me out. It's always an honor working with LeVanna. She's just an incredible person, incredible soul, and an incredible podcast host, by the way. You know, you probably asked the right guy to ask the right question. I had about 20 years ago, I got involved in Proposition 215, and I possibly, as an attorney, may have formed more collectives or cooperatives than most people in the state of California. I've probably got my damage of about maybe 400 or 500 different collectives and nonprofits and things of that nature. And I helped develop a system for cultivators to have a defense on how to operate and things of that nature. And there's a substantial difference in what occurred and the answer lies in who's benefiting. You know, in the 215 days, everybody had safe access to great items, cheap. There was lots of economic activity for those who had suffered within the systems, within the draconian laws, those who believed in it. Mm-hmm. There was a lot more culture in the plant. When the 215 days, everything we talked about was medicinal. Everything we talked about was a medical purpose. All the seminars I gave was on why we should have safe and equal and open access to the plant, because I felt like it was a lot of an educational stage. And and a lot of people made a lot of money.
That's one of the myths, you know, Fred. Freddy. Can I call you Fred or Freddy?
Freddy is fine.
Freddy. Okay, so Freddy, that's one of the myths, is that everybody in the cannabis industry is making gobs of money. I can tell you right now that is not true, and only 24% of cannabis companies are actually profitable, according to Bo Whitney from New Frontier Data. He put that out, I think it was like 2 weeks ago. So there's a myth about that
too. Are you
too.
talking about pre-adult use or
We were making a lot of money before legalization, or
right,
recreational legalization.
Right, and it was working. California was working, right, guys? You're out there.
And yeah, but when you said that data, was that pre-adult use?
That was a look at the entire industry in the United States. That percentage, 24% in the industry are profitable. 24%.
And that's a current statistic.
Correct. 2 weeks ago.
Got it. Yeah. No, when I said profits, that was the thing with 215. With 215 is we had complete limitation. You're supposed to be a fully nonprofit. And two, you had complete limitations on what you can do. You couldn't brand, you couldn't market, you couldn't put a tremendous amount of investments into something. Even though it was 215, you had a collective, you could be raided and shut down at any time. There was a lot more of the Wild Wild West energies going on. Mm-hmm. But I produced major cannabis events, and those things were fun, and we gave away products. We gave away products at dispensaries to veterans and cancer patients and to children with pediatric epilepsy. And we did all these wonderful things. We acted like a community. People didn't cheat each other or rob each other. And I'm only speaking from the California market. I don't know how the differences were as far as other states go. Yep. And I know I'm not speaking from a pure legal standpoint. I'm speaking from a more cultural standpoint.
Observer, you live in California, Freddie. We're in Freddie, where do you live in California?
I live in Pasadena.
Okay, so right near the Rose Bowl. I broadcast from the Rose Bowl once. Okay, so we get that that's where your expertise is, and that's why we want you here, because we recognize that California is different than any state in the union. It just is. When I visited, I used to say it's a different planet out there. It just really is. I feel like the attitudes are different, the lifestyle's different, the attitudes, everything there is different. And they were one of the first to have medical cannabis available to patients.
We are the first.
Right. They 1996. Am I right on that one? Did I get it right?
Correct.
Okay. So they got it first, and it was working. I visited California, I'll admit it, and we had a home visit by a caregiver, right, who had a lot of different types of cannabis. And he came to the house, and we ended up buying a few things and enjoying it. I think it was the first time I actually tasted Blue Dream. Guys, a very popular strain that's out there. LeVanna is smiling. She knows. So I guess the thing I'm asking again is, did adult use screw up the California market or not?
Okay, so I'll give you two answers.
Okay.
The answer is absolutely we did. But that doesn't mean that Prop 215 was working either. It was just working better than adult.
Okay.
Yeah. So Prop 215, I mean, I was very busy as a criminal defense attorney. You would still be arrested. People were getting felonies for, simple transportation. You couldn't brand or market or build brand value, file trademarks, or do anything deeper. You couldn't raise capital or have investments or things of that nature. People still grew in a clandestine manner because the sole most important thing in Prop 215 grows is not getting caught, not being found out about. Because technically you could, at a certain point, you could only grow 6 plants per patient. You might have 10 patients, you can grow 60 plants. You can't scale or grow out of that. However, people were just more happier back then. The amount of capital that has been lost in California is incredible. The amount of family farms, the amount of people who, when these companies came online, they were built to lose money. You see, most businesses or families or small farms or people weren't built to build a business to lose money. But when you had all of these institutional investors, publicly traded Canadian corporations, and things of that nature who had the ability to hemorrhage millions of dollars, or take a retailer like MedMen, hemorrhage millions of dollars so that they can have a race to the bottom to put everybody out of business. The thing is two major things. One, overtaxation that cripples the growers out here. Hyper regulation that cripples the operators out here. I am an owner operator. I have been through the gauntlet and continue to do so. So those two things are business killers. The next big problem that I've seen is when we lobbied for adult use, we did so with limiting the size of canopies for and not being able to stack multi-licenses. Because if you were able to get, the big boys would have stayed out of it because there's just not enough. You know, and if everybody had limited to 20,000 square feet at a cap, which is still big, that wouldn't put people out of business. That wouldn't attract, you know, companies that own alcohol companies to move in. It wouldn't allow these guys who can hemorrhage losses. The only people that I believe are actually profitable are the legacy brands who were able to continue to survive through it. Right. Because they were first tossed to the side and now they're looked at as the preeminent groups or entities to align yourselves with. And that's because the plant doesn't lie. Right. The plant won't lie. The plant knows its owner. The plant knows its investor. The plant knows who's touching it and why they're touching it. And every time, no matter how great of a business model you have and how great your stolen SOPs are, that plant is an equalizer. And a lot of those investors don't understand that.
All right. LeVanna, you got something for Freddy? I know you do.
I mean, yeah, I love everything he's saying. And, you know, just like to echo some of that. And you brought up Steve D'Angelo, and the reason why people kind of resent him is because he is the one that lobbied to push for those larger farms and basically opened up the door to that. And another interesting thing is, like, in terms of legalities, is like California, you know, they legalized it, but then they allowed all of the counties and cities and municipalities create their own laws around it. And the way the cards fell was really unpredictable and weird, where we ended up with 5 years later, 6 cultivation licenses in Mendocino County, which is part of the Emerald Triangle, which before Prop 64 was supplying what?
80%.
80% of the world's weed. And then counties that had nothing to do with weed and were actually pretty conservative anti-weed, like Santa Barbara County, becoming the home for the mega farms. Mm-hmm. And that really turned the tables. And you know, and like he was saying, you know, but I am starting to see some of the and something that should be like talked about, what I was talking about before Freddy got on, was like the difference between legacy markets in different states, and the legacy market in California being cultivators. Farmers don't really have time to be educated. The people in the Emerald Triangle are really getting a lot less information because all the information is coming through the internet and social media, and they really don't. When I go up there, my feed slows down. I'm not getting all the info, but it was like taking candy from babies. And they did not have the foresight or the business knowledge to see how corporations operate with like a divide and conquer and, you know, manipulative tactics that big ag and big pharma typically use. And so, you know, it was just a tragedy that like a lot of those legacy farmers literally dug up their life savings off their farm, tried to get like legit and be licensed, only to be bamboozled by their local governments and lose the farms.
Speaking of local governments, Freddy, has there been a conspiracy by local, state, and federal governments to do everything possible to try to actually challenge the industry, in fact, set it up for failure? I don't think anybody got together and had a conference call and said, this is what we're going to do. But there seems, if you look at the pattern of behavior and laws and the pushbacks on pretty much every state, and of course the federal government too, there's a lot of layers that you have to go through to even get into business, let alone thrive or have a profit.
Without a doubt. And yes, there have been conference calls to set this industry up for failure. And the reason being is that they decide to set it up for the small few. You see, that's how our government hinders us. Is cannabis should have something for everyone to feed their families and do well. Cannabis wasn't designed to create cannabis millionaires and billionaires. It was never its purpose. But when you have lobbyists of the pharmaceutical industry, when you have lobbyists from the tobacco industry, when you have lobbyists from the food and beverage industry, those are the same lobbyists who've been funding these politicians and government officials for years and decades. And now they have that inside access direct to them. Mm-hmm. And that's how you see a lot of the chips fall. I've been involved in different cities. I'm the one who created and drafted everything in Atlanta. Our mayor at the time just got sentenced to 14 months in federal prison for corruption. The vice mayor, I was deeply involved in all of those guys and drafting and things of that nature. But they want to design this thing so that they can have 4 or 5 operators. Going back to what LeVanna said is when we created the city of Atlanta, the biggest downfall that immediately crushed the cannabis industry is the city council issued out about 175 cultivation licenses, and every building in the manufacturing zone was at least 20,000 square feet. So you've got 175,000 times 20,000 square feet. And they only issued 2 retail licenses in that city.
Sounds like
what you saw is all the cities said, hey, if soccer mom can't see you on Main Street conducting a retail, we'll go ahead, we'll take all this mega taxation. You just hide away in buildings in the desert. We don't see you, you just pay us money. That's cool, no problem. But where are we going to sell this stuff? No. And so when you had all these farms come online, you initially had like 50 licensed dispensaries. And then look at the city of Los Angeles and what a mess they created out of their entire program. So now you take guys, first off, you tax them to death, you overregulate them to death, and then you don't have a place for them to sell it at. And what do? They go back to what they know.
Forget selling for a second. Hey, Freddy, I got to interrupt. Forget selling for a second. They can't even figure out where you can consume it in public, if you can consume it in public. I mean, there are still so many issues. Yeah, we've got 23 states that are legal. Minnesota may have done perhaps the best job, at least it looks that way on paper. We'll see in reality how it rolls out over the next couple of years. But there's so many issues that the 2 sides or the 3 sides or the 4 sides, whoever's involved with these decisions, just don't have the research and science or understand how this plant works and how it has worked. I love it when they say, well, there's no place to smoke it in public. I said, for 86 years, people smoked it in public. We just weren't seen. You'd go around the corner. You'd be behind a bus. You'd behind an alleyway. You were sneaking. You were rebelling against the establishment back in the 70s. Okay. That's really how it got caught on. And now it's legit. Now it's legal. Now the people that are making those decisions can't even figure it out where you can consume it. Now, look, we're up against the bottom of the hour, Freddie. And first of all, appreciate you coming on. I think I hope everything worked out at the appointment you had. Appreciate making the effort and getting here. How can people get in touch with you? We have viewers in California, actually more in California than I do in Massachusetts. Tell us how people can get a hold of you if they want to pick your brain as a cannabis advocate for the plant medicine.
Sure. For this purpose and because of my weird name, try the THE Fox, FOXX firm, FIRM.com, thefoxfirm.com. I'm Freddy Sayegh.
Got it. We got it. And I see it behind you too. So you reinforced it. That's awesome. Freddy Sayegh, thank you so much for joining us here on the beginning of our lawyers only show on Green Rush Live. It is a little past 4:20. I know people in the chat room like to take part at 4:20. Apologies for that. Enjoy. We're going to take ourselves a little break, play our favorite song by Jonathan Edwards, and we'll be back on the other side with Harry Bernstein and Jeff Hoffman. There will be some fireworks over the next 30 minutes. Don't go away.
Yeah, this is a tune that I wrote back in 19... I've forgotten. We had a saying in our old band, one of my first bands in 1966 or so. What are you going to do tonight? Oh, just... you know, like every other night, just gonna lay around the shanty and put a good buzz on. Gonna sit down in the kitchen, fix me something good to eat. Make my head a little high, make the whole day complete. Gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. Pass it to me, baby, pass it to me slow. We'll take time out to smile a little before you let her go. We're gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. You're on something. Go ahead. Rick Brodsky, everybody. Nothing to do and there's always room for more. Fill it, light it, shut up and close that door, baby. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Take it, okay. Prohibition never works, it's time to realize it. It grows in my backyard, it's time to legalize it. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. I'm going to sit down in my rented car. I'm going to jam it into drive. I'm going to head on out and play at WSCA with Sean. I'm glad I'm alive. We're going to lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Every night and day, we're going to lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on.
Nice. It's Friday. Thank God. Thank God Jonathan Edwards is joining us live in the WSCA studio.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to a Friday afternoon edition of the really live Business of Cannabis talk show. We call it Green Rush Live. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media, and every week we talk about different issues, policies, and newsworthy items in the world of cannabis with people who are in the industry. One person in Ohio, for instance, Harry Bernstein, he's an attorney. He and I have actually met over the years that we've been doing my interviews within the weeds. Now we've got a really live talk show, Harry. So we've made a lot of progress. And I might add, because we live stream 24/7, there are times when every time I check the feed, it's you and me, it's you and me, it's you. It's a little weird, but we're working on actually not having any repeats. But Harry, thank you for joining us. LeVanna Vassau is my guest host today. She is from the Bay Area and has her own radio show on the cannabis scene out in that neck of the woods. But Harry, since you are from Ohio, let's talk right off the bat about, does the election that happened this week give any indication about what might happen if cannabis gets on the ballot for adult use in the fall?
So first, again, thanks for having me, and thanks for having me live. It's unique for me. So not that I'm certainly used to having conversations, and I appreciate the opportunity. The short answer is yes. So most people who are watching this show follow the politics. In Ohio, what the GOP party found is the only way they can control the population or control the agenda is by reducing our ability to vote. Effectively, they've gerrymandered us out of any legislative opportunities. So Ohio's proposing some more constitutional amendments because it's not getting done in Columbus. And not only that, there's a cannabis issue too that's going on. That's not constitutional. But the bottom line is Ohio strongly rejected any limit on the voters' ability to limit the Constitution. That being said, there will be a reproductive rights issue on the ballot in Ohio in November. That's already passed. There's strong indication there will be a cannabis adult use legislation or proposed law on the ballots. And when you combine those two issues with the activists that really came out strong in this last election just a few days ago, those voters are going to tend to break strongly towards libertarian rights in general, whether it's cannabis or whatever. We're adults. Let us act as adults. And it's you hate to say it. I mean, I don't hate to say it, but it's become the worst nightmare of the guys in Columbus who are trying to maintain control. So the short answer is yes. The long answer is it's a little bit complicated, but still yes.
All right, fair enough. And speaking of yes, Jeffrey Hoffman is with us. He hosts a show it's Wednesday afternoon at 4:20. Am I right, Jeff?
Something like that.
Yeah. And where's your Yankees hat? You decided not to wear it on the show, or what?
So the hats have been a little bit of controversy recently. I don't know so much controversy. Usually the Yankees hat I wear has the ear flaps.
Yeah.
And so you usually wear that in September or October because it's getting cool because you got to pull it down over your ears. The players wear them on the field. And as I was telling my Mets fans, the Mets lost 3 games. The Yankees only took 1 game down in Baltimore, but the Mets lost all 3 games down in Baltimore. And as I was telling my buddy Bruce Sturman, the Mets fans could have these hats with the ear flaps too, but they just don't play in October, so there's really no need for them, right? That's really kind of what it comes down to. So that hat'll come back in September, but for now we usually wear the Central Park Conservancy hat, but today no hat for you.
All right, so now that we've got that clarified,
you asked.
No. Hey, I love that. Look,
there you go.
Have a conversation. This is beautiful. You love the chat. I love the conversation. What can I tell you? A big day in New York for cannabis, and it wasn't exactly what a lot of people expected. A 2-week extension of the restraining order. You were the one, by the way, that I read first this afternoon that had the breaking news of this actually happening. Can you walk us through a little bit about what today's ruling means and how it might impact the industry in New York?
Yeah, so it means the first retail license is not going to be able to be deployed for these next 2 weeks at least. So there's this card license, conditional adult use retail dispensary license. It was the first retail license in the state. I mean, I could unpack this for hours. I mean, you know me, we could go on for hours about how the state implemented it. Should they have done it this way? Should they not have? The long story short, is that different groups sued saying you didn't implement the law correctly. And if you had implemented correctly, we would have had some of the first licenses, but instead you're giving them to these other groups. So we are harmed. So stop and let's have a full hearing about this and let's really figure it out. And
who are these groups and what do you think their intention is?
So the groups are, the first group to sue is disabled veterans. I think other groups will sue. And if you want me to really get into unpacking it all, I'm certainly happy to do that. I'll try to do it very briefly because like I said, I can go on for hours about this stuff. So if you look at the law, there's a couple of really critical things in the law that dictated how you were going to issue applications and to whom they were going to go to. First, there is a specific place in the law where it says the board and the office can really kind of do what they want as far as opening application periods and accepting applications and deciding who's going to get licenses from the applications that they've taken in. However, and this however is obviously the big thing, the first application period that opens for retail licensing has to open to everyone at the same time. That is in the law. And the argument that the disabled, and there's a bigger argument about who gets priority, and we can set that aside and talk about that in a second, but the disabled veterans are saying you didn't open the application for the first retail dispensary license to everyone at the same time. The only people it was open to are these people that had the conviction and the profitable business. Those were the requirements for card. So OCM could kind of say, well, it was open to everybody. Jeffrey Hoffman could never have gotten a license because I was never convicted of a cannabis offense, right? So in the legal profession, we would say it was constructively not open to me. Yes, it was open. I could have applied, but there's no way I could have gotten a license. And in another place, we use this term constructively or constructive in the legal profession that I think a lot of people would understand a little better is when it comes to evictions. So you are evicted if you don't pay your rent and your landlord goes to court and gets the court to say you got to leave, right? Let's say your place floods, the pipes burst and your place is flooded and it's not going to be habitable for weeks. The landlord didn't evict you, but he has constructively evicted you, right? Like in reality, he didn't evict you, but for all intents and purposes, we're in the same place. He constructively evicted you. And so that is something that is very common in the law. It's a term folks know. And so just, what the argument is here is that, yeah, it was open and Jeffrey could have applied, but it was constructively not open to him. There was no way he could possibly have gotten a license. Now, how could they have gotten around that? They could have said, well, we're going to let everybody apply, but if you happen to have the conviction in the profitable business, we're going to give you 1,000 bonus points. And the most points anybody else could possibly get with a perfect application would be 100. So everybody we gave the 1,000 bonus points is going to get a license, but it was open to everybody. We scored your application and off you went. And oh, by the way, if you got the 100, we are going to give you a license after we give everybody that got 1,000. But you got a license, just not until we're done with the people that got 1,000 points, right?
Gotcha.
So these are some of the ways you could have gotten around it. You might have had to let some of the priority classes in the law go ahead, and maybe they get 10,000 priority points. So those few go first. And let me just give you the priority classes in the law. So we've laid it all out there for you. The top priority class is you had to have 3 things. Yes, the conviction, but also you had to have an income below a certain threshold where you live, and you had to have lived most of your life in a community most impacted by cannabis enforcement or disproportionately impacted by whatever we want to say. Just you had to have all 3 of those things. That's priority number 1. Priority number 2 is distressed farmers. Priority number 3 is disabled veterans. Priority number 4 is number 1 without the income or the conviction. Just you lived most of your life in a community most impacted. And then number 5 is everyone else. And if you've really been paying attention to New York, what did I not mention in that list? Minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses, which are social and economic equity applicants, but for whatever reason, in the priority threshold that the OCM released in their regulations, they did not itemize them particularly like they did those other 4 that I did, which means they fall into the 5th category. Gotcha. And so, frankly, they're also go ahead. Yeah, I know that's an
Jeffrey,
unbelievable amount of stuff.
There are other people. Yeah. I know that you host the show solo. Okay, I get it. All right, but I immediately want to go to Harry because if Ohio passes this Pat gets a yes on the question for adult use on the ballot this fall or next fall, whenever the damn election is going to be. This is what you have to look forward to, Harry. I mean,
well, and I think they've learned some of those lessons. I mean, going back to what Jeffrey said, my understanding, and I have no desire to learn the specifics of how the sausage gets made in Albany. I got enough problems in Columbus. So my understanding is it wouldn't stand up to Supreme Court test if you prioritize applications based upon race or gender. Now, not to get into it now, like Jeffrey said, we could spend days talking about that, which is why, and I was an economics major, is you can do it with data. You can prioritize the community they came from, unfair enforcement. You can prioritize whether they were, those are not protected classes. What little I remember from law school about those type of things, but I've done my employment law with these. So that's why you're seeing more and more states, they can't say they go to minority, people of color. They can't go to women. They can try to work some things in there that aren't defined as protective classes. Now, Ohio's tried to do that. We all know, and when I get calls from somebody saying, a business owner, can I be sued if, I said, as long as somebody's got $300 in a piece of paper, they can file a complaint. So you can always be sued. We can only build in the language. What I do want to touch on is the sad fact of the matter is in Ohio is our legislators aren't doing the job. They've seen we've now got adult use in 20 plus states. Ohio is quickly being surrounded by these states, and the legislators outside of a couple of them and across the aisle for a few guys don't want to do their job, see what's working out there, see what we can avoid, see these things, and then pass a bill. Instead, you get a group of, and there's flaws in the proposed legislation from my point. I might heard it at the poll. It's heard them before. You're maintaining licenses in the hand of the current owners of medical license. You're not opening it up to the community, and that you are to some extent, but it's a 2 to 3 year waiting period. So, people are going to go to the vote and say, why should I grant a monopoly in the cannabis business or oligopoly in the cannabis business, or, how few guys it's funded. And that's going to hurt them at the ballot box. I don't, I'm not making predictions anymore on that. But I still think they'll overcome it. But again, it's a legitimate question. There's things you can do. If you're going to call it regulated like alcohol, and I think, Jimmy, we even talked about this, there's approximately 3,000 alcohol licenses in Cuyahoga County, which is just Cleveland. They're proposing somewhere in the neighborhood of, after expansion, somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe a couple hundred adult use licenses in the whole state. And Ohio is 11 million people. It's not the biggest, but it's not the smallest. I think it's the 7th or 9th largest state by population now. So, all those issues are, we're going to face it. Well, of course, it keeps lawyers busy. That's one thing. But on the other hand, it's not good for the state. The state's defending it. The state just paid $20 million for this stupid election they were going to lose. And now they'll pay millions more fighting adult use legislation when the public wants it. It's just insanity down there. So
I think our whole political system is screwed up right now.
You and I have talked about that.
We can do it offline if you want, but I do, LeVanna, I want to get you involved with this. If you have a question for these two excellent attorneys, one in New York, one in Ohio, both very passionate, you can ask whatever you'd like.
Well, I have thoughts.
Okay, thoughts.
Give us some thoughts. From California's, I don't want to curse, but the clown show, we like to call it. One thing that, like, looking back, that a lot of people in California felt is that it was the Prop 64 was pushed too fast, and for some reason they pushed this through and they leave them very blank, and then everything gets figured out after the fact. And they push it through. One thought that occurred to me was, like, in California, why I feel bad that I voted yes on 64, because it really screwed everything up. It needed to be better worded, better figured out before we did it. But they always kind of hold us by the, they hold us hostage with the idea that all these people who are incarcerated won't get out of jail until they legalize it. So, like, these things should become separate, right? But for, like, the creating of, like, the laws and all that, like, if it's not ready, it's not ready, and it shouldn't be pushed through. I think that people should listen to that when they're saying it's not quite ready. Now, Ohio sounds different, and then I thought it was interesting. He was saying Ohio was surrounded, because the other thing that is, we are, as a nation, we are currently economically surrounded by two countries who have legalized it federally. I believe Mexico's right on their way, right?
They've been trying to do it for a couple of years. They have a few issues in that country that we don't need to get into. We have enough issues in our own country. Let's just say.
But yeah, I mean, I'm in New York, but California is my market. But I have so many questions for our New York person, because
his name's Jeffrey Hoffman.
Jeffrey, like, who are these disabled veterans? Seem to be, are they virtue signaling with that group? Are they concerned that they're going to lose because I know veterans who really want to use cannabis and really can't, because they will lose all of their benefits. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder what these disabled veterans are planning to do involving with cannabis. There's the Hellman group I interviewed before, who got it taken all the way to the federal to be able to be researched for PTSD and everything. I'm not saying, and the veterans are very important, but I kind of I'm suspicious. I'm just saying, I'm suspicious. Who's behind this group? Because the rumor is that it's MSOs.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Sure. So, I mean, look, there's all kinds of interest in everything. Let's be very clear, though. The law, MRTA, the cannabis law, has disabled veterans as one of the priority classes. The priority classes are the ones that I itemized before, right? So, I mean, I get there may be money helping them and interest behind it, but I mean, this is what the law says, right? The disabled veterans, the distressed farmers, minority-owned businesses, woman-owned businesses, these are the classes that the law says are supposed to get priority, right? Just to get back to the Dormant Commerce Clause issue a bit about
that was going to be my next question.
Oh,
everybody's opinion about Dormant Commerce Clause.
We've had hours discussion on this, including the professor from I think it was Marquette or something that put it out there. He says you can do interstate commerce because of this dormant.
I think the guy from Vanderbilt's been beating that.
Vanderbilt, thank you.
It's a nice argument, but
Can they win? Can they win that argument?
Jeffrey, you want to answer that first?
I think sure. I mean, obviously this is my bailiwick, so I should probably say something about it. So
keep it brief, Jeff.
For those of you that are trying to follow along at home, and I apologize if you can't, because us attorneys are really getting in the weeds here. So the Dormant Commerce Clause basically says, in its essence, and we just had a Supreme Court case where I believe it was Justice Kavanaugh explained to us again what the Supreme Court wants to see there. If a state makes a rule that treats its citizens better than out-of-state folks, you're going to have a big problem here. It's going to, if it economically or otherwise disincentivize or impacts people out of state, you're going to have a Dormant Commerce Clause issue. So just real quick on what's happened within cannabis, Maine tried to have a residency requirement for their medical cannabis program. If you wanted a medical cannabis license in Maine, they originally said you had to be a Maine resident. A bunch of people sued. They lost in district court, and they lost in the First Circuit. So as far as the First Circuit Court of Appeals in the United States is concerned, you cannot create rules within your state about cannabis that disenfranchise people outside of the state or otherwise put a burden on them more so than people in your state. In New York, people sued about the same thing. The district court gave them a TRO and then had an injunction, and then they settled. So in that district court and in the Second Circuit, which covers New York and the Mid-Atlantic states, there's no decision there yet because they settled before they got there. Interestingly enough, there has been a decision in a district court in the Ninth Circuit that goes the other way than the First Circuit did. So the First Circuit says you can't have residence requirements. The Ninth Circuit, I don't remember it was exactly a residence requirement. I don't remember exactly the details of the case, but it was on point, and they went the other way. And so it looks like eventually, if the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals agrees with that district court, we're going to have two circuit courts that disagree with each other on the same topic, and everybody knows what happens when we have that.
I don't.
We go to the
let me,
Court.
if you don't mind.
Usually
it's supposed to go to the Supreme Court, but that's happened with cannabis before, and they punted on it just a year ago. So you had two conflicting decisions about whether cannabis should be covered by health insurance. And the Justice Department argument was that basically the way I read it was, we're working on it. We'll get there. It's for the legislator to do, not you. So the Supreme Court, they were on vacation or something. They were traveling like they usually do, and they punted on the issue and said, we're not going to take it up at this time. And but what's supposed to happen is they're supposed to address it.
That's right. And Harry is spot on. I would put a distinction between you just a bit. The insurance case is purely about cannabis. This case is more of a dormant commerce clause case. And I know the justices love Justice Alito. I know loves his, he was the guy in Tennessee whiskey. I do think it was Kavanaugh. In this decision that happened out of California, the dormant commerce clause case we had recently was a California case about pork. California has a law. If you're going to sell pork in California, 99% of the pork is from out of state, from Georgia and North Carolina mostly. You have to treat the piggy nicely based on how California wants it treated. And the justices have said they actually let the California law stand, and there's all kinds of different opinions in the decision. It's kind of all over the place. The key part of all of it is that I think it was Kavanaugh, in his opinion, said the reason why we're fighting for California is because the pork producers, did not bring this dormant commerce clause case the way we like to think about them. And what he said is the way we like to think about them is when you take your state citizens and you put them in a better position than out-of-state citizens. And so that is where I think Kavanaugh is. That's where I think the court is. That is clearly what happened up in Maine. They were purely a licensing for out-of-state. The New York issue was more, could the conviction be restricted out of state? Under New York's law, the conviction you had to qualify you for the card license had to be a New York conviction. That's why the Michigan dude sued. And the settlement was they gave Michigan dude a license, so they didn't actually have to decide the case on the merits.
It's interesting because, and Jimmy knows this, my background, we had a family beer and wine distributor, and I was working at the company when they started to come down. I think it was out of Boston. There was a big pricing decision about discriminatory pricing for in-state wineries versus, and we had that issue in Ohio. If you were a winery, you need a wholesale distributor. If you're a winery from outside of Ohio, you did, and that became invalidated because of this discrimination. When we talk about interstate commerce, though, and I know, we're actually talking about the flower itself crossing state lines. So as long as Ohio says, hey, you've got to have a license to sell cannabis, yes, they can require that. But I believe they can still prevent people from bringing it in, cultivating it in California, and then bringing it into Ohio.
Absolutely.
Right. So that's where there's some confusion. And that's where I think, and I haven't read the law review article deep in depth, but my understanding, I did talk, it's funny, I talked to a Western Reserve Law School professor about the dormant commerce clause issue. And it's a bit of a stretch to say because that product is legal in Ohio, anybody, the gates are open. That's not the case. I mean, for example, if Indiana, who's a very conservative state, says it ain't coming through my state, whether Ohio wants it or not, the minute that truck hits the line in Indiana, sorry, they're losing a truckload of cannabis real quick.
Yeah. Hey, I want to. Great timing for the dog, definitely. But I do want to ask you guys, go back to that dormant commerce clause and explain this to me. You've already kind of touched on it, LeVanna. I know you know this too. There's a lot of brands and concentrates and edible recipes that are crossing state lines and being recreated in each individual state because they're able to dictate the genetics and you could, whatever the recipe is, they can do that. However, you can't have the flower crossing state lines. Now, isn't there a legal challenge in there somewhere, guys?
Well, no. Crossing a state line. That's racketeering.
Like the intellectual property can cross state lines. Right, I mean, there's no restrictions on that. I mean, there's restrictions and there's rules.
The intellectual property with THC in it.
No, I mean, not.
Well, now there's issues as to whether you can actually trademark and copyright some of those things and patent them, but that's a different issue. But as far as licensing agreements, if you're a license holder in Ohio for hold a processor's license and you sign an agreement where the guy's going to sell. Now there's other issues involved. Contract. Let's say you stiff the guy. Can he sue you to collect, for damages? Now you make the claim, it's an illegal it's illegal under federal law. So that's where guys like Jeff and I stay busy. So it's all these issues. So the flower is actually illegal. The recipe is not illegal. I mean, there were a lot of these issues in prohibition back in the 20s, with alcohol beverages as well. Yeah. So again, you're talking about, or trade, Willie's Weed, I believe, or what, I don't know the name, is sold in multiple states, but you're just licensed. Again, I'll go to the breweries. Coors Brewing Company, when they moved into Ohio, expanded. Primary component was their brand only brewed in Golden, Colorado. Within 10 years, they had, because of their expansion, opened a brewery in Shenandoah, Virginia, because that was the closest water they could find to Golden. That was the story, anyways. Whatever. It was an economic decision, but the breweries have been doing this. That's what made Budweiser what it was at the time. Is he figured out he could expand by building breweries throughout the United States and then the world. Yeah. Whether So now you're doing it with co-packers. Again, that's how the craft. Sam Adams, you're there. Sam Adams, when they grew, there at the peak of their growth, somewhere around 2% of their beer was being brewed by them. It was brewed by excess brewers like Genesee that were going out of business.
Well, regulate cannabis like alcohol, will you please, at this point? Because I mean,
they got my vote.
All right, I just need quick answers from each of you. I'm guessing both of you know that Minnesota has now voted it in. They've done a lot of things right. Where do you think Minnesota may have missed something at this point? Or where do you think the state will go in the next year, 2, 3, 4 years before they even launch their damn program? Jeffrey, go first on Ohio. Brief, Jeff.
So I'm a New York attorney. I know that Minnesota has legalized, but just honestly, I've not really tuned into it that much. I mean, I have no disrespect for Minnesota, but more people live within a mile of me than live in all of Minnesota. So it just
spoken like a true New Yorker too.
There you go. There you go.
Awesome. There you go. Harry, what about you?
Well, I didn't dig into the legislation. I know they're having some difficulties now. I do know that Minnesota's an unusual state and progressive. They voted in one of my favorite wrestlers as governor one time because they were disgusted with what was going on. And
the body.
To some extent,
body, yes.
It was the GOP that held it up. And then when they were finally able, again, like so many legislators, they held up the legislation. When they finally got control of the agenda, it passed very quickly. Governors behind it. I think they're going to, Wisconsin's going crazy because they're going to lose a lot of money. So, again, the challenges from what I can see, from what I read, are really the GOP saying you're going too fast. Let's look at this again. So, again. I think they're going to be a good player in that market because when you go to the west of them, nobody's going to legalize it too quickly either. So they're in a good position geographically.
All right, Jeffrey, Wednesdays at 4:20 on LinkedIn. You just search Jeffrey Hoffman, right?
Yeah, LinkedIn, Wednesday at 4:20. That's me every Wednesday.
And I was very impressed. It's amazing how you can interact it was over an hour this week with your chat room, and there's no one else talking to you. I mean, it's just you talking to the chat.
So yeah, I mean, they are putting in comments. There is a comment thread, and I'm responding to what they do in the comments. But I said, we could go for another 10 hours right now. I mean, yeah, I know Jimmy can't handle it.
I've had a long week, and I'm counting the minutes, and we're at the top of the hour. Jeffrey Hoffman, I really enjoy chit-chatting with you. We didn't even go over the safe banking thing because we're already on record as saying you don't think so, and I do.
It's not happening anytime soon.
Yeah, you owe me dinner when you're wrong.
I know. Harry, I've been wrong so many times. I should be really smart. Harry, what do you think of the safe banking? Is it going to?
I think I want to think it's good, but I'm starting to lean towards Jeff's idea only because I know Sherrod Brown and Cory Booker, and I think they're asking for way too much, which is why how things don't get done. There's no negotiation that goes on anymore in the Senate.
No, because we've forgotten what it's like to be an American. Oh, I got into politics again. Let's not get into that. I'm going to take a break. We're going to come back with more attorneys in the next half hour on Green Brush Live, so don't go away.
You would think that it is. However, there's quite a bit of debate right now in the accounting industry when it relates to cannabis with this exact question. I'm part of a few different networking groups that are solely accountants for cannabis companies. And there's been quite a bit of back and forth in those communities and discussion regarding whether 280E, if it went away, if the administration legalized cannabis or took it off of Schedule 1, what would happen? And it could go either way right now. The debate is it can make the accountant's life much easier. That's what a lot of the inexperienced accountants are saying right now, it seems. Whereas the accountants that have been in this industry for a while and have gone through the same thing that happened with hemp a few years ago are saying that will make lives more difficult, because when hemp became declassified a while back, the accounting became more complicated.
A lot of noise coming in from somebody else. I can barely hear you, Jimmy.
Well, that's scary unto itself. Welcome back to the last hour of Green Rush Live on a Friday afternoon. We do this cannabis business talk show every week here on Pro Cannabis Media. Sherry, if you are having any technical difficulties, I would suggest stepping out and talking to Dan, my technical video director, and he might be able to help you out with the feedback. It usually means you've got a speaker on while your microphone's on, but I don't know that's true. And don't take my word for it. You are having any technical difficulties?
Yes.
Yeah, and obviously there's a delay going. You're listening to the feed. You shouldn't be listening to the feed. You should just be in the Zoom room.
Just 1 second. Let me hold on 1 second.
I don't know that's true.
Let me
all right.
Let me let
Sherry, do me a favor. Step out of the room.
I'm doing it now.
There you go. Thank you.
Better?
That's the voice behind the curtain. That's Dan French, and we'd all be lost without.
I appreciate that. He just took away one of my references about Oz and Toto and pulling back the curtain on this whole thing in New York.
Yes, he is the man behind the curtain on this for sure. LeVanna Vassau joins us as well. LeVanna is a contributor from California. She's our California news correspondent on We Talk News. And Will Luzier is with us as well. And Will was instrumental in writing the law in Massachusetts for that ballot question that got passed, that we're into, I think now, let's see, 2016, almost the 7th year since it passed, Will. Does it seem like crazy, huh?
It doesn't seem like that long, but time flies when you're having fun.
Right. And if you're not having fun, it really drags, which is really cannabis standard time, which is 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Sherry, tell us, first of all, what is the name? You are in New York City, and tell us you are a consultant, among other things. Tell us what your company is and tell us a little about you. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, Jimmy. We've known each other, over the years. We share that Boston sports fan in common. Very, very important factoid, although I am in New York. 68 Partners is my consulting practice. It is cannabis focused. I've been cannabis focused since 2017. We do license application consulting. We do post application preparation and support. I'm a regulatory compliance expert and all business advisory when it comes to cannabis.
There you go. And you've got a very interesting state to be operating in right now. We had Jeffrey Hoffman on in the last half hour, and we went over the 2-week restraining, whatever they're doing. They're putting it off for 2 more weeks in New York before they issue any more licenses. LeVanna, how long have you been involved with the cannabis world?
As they call legacy in 25 years, maybe.
Thank you. Right.
Professionally since 2008.
There you go. Thank you. Will, tell us what's going on in Massachusetts, because the biggest thing about Massachusetts right now, and as far as news go, is the Cannabis Control Commission can't get it right. They can't communicate with the right people more than anything else. Are you privy to what's going on with them?
I'm not an insider, but I do attend virtually all of the meetings. And so, yes, the executive director has gone on leave and is leaving at the end of the year. And the chair communicated that in a kind of a strange way to the rest of the commission at the end of last month. And then yesterday they had a meeting, and she apologized to the commissioners for the way she handled that. So yeah, it's I think it's just a bump in the road and an organizational issue that they'll probably be able to deal with, but it doesn't look good from the public face.
Right. I mean, Shannon used the word crisis, and that screwed up everything. But they've also done something that upsets me as a talk show host, because I don't like to consider myself a journalist anymore because I don't get paid. I basically just talk and meet people and we have good conversations. Banning Grant Smith Ellis from these meetings makes absolutely no sense. This is a guy, LeVanna, you'll like this story. He's been live streaming 4 years Cannabis Control Commission meetings online. He's actually providing a great service for the public because he's taking what's going on in that committee and sharing it on the internet. He testified before the legislature in Massachusetts about overages or what the Cannabis Control Commission is doing. They didn't like it, so they banned him. Well, this is a violation of the First Amendment, is it not?
Yeah, 100%.
Everybody agrees on that, right?
Although federal, if it's on a federal airwaves or federal anything, it's
it's Massachusetts. It's Massachusetts. Will, go ahead.
I used to attend the press gaggle that happened after the commission hearings, and I would ask questions. And I was asked not to attend anymore. I think because I wasn't a credentialed journalist. And I don't know if they're relying on that with regard to Grant or not. But I think it's unfortunate that, he's not able to sort of report on the stuff and ask questions.
It is ridiculous. Sherry, this is the stuff you get to look forward to in about 4 years, because Massachusetts is a good 4 years into the rollout of their adult use regulations and compliance issues and all that neat stuff. But it seems like New York can't even get to first base yet. Am I right?
Well, look, as I said at the outset, I'm a recovering lawyer, so I'm going to offer a little bit of a tempered response to some of the hysteria around recent events. If anybody is shocked and awed that this lawsuit actually happened and that it happened when it did, you probably haven't been in cannabis, and you haven't been in cannabis New York very long. So this has always been looming. And Jimmy, my perspective is also, I've been in other states. I have worked in other states as they're rolling out their program. I'm working with people to get their brands, their products commercialized, their license applications in. So I am familiar with the early stage rollout of other states. And back to New York, Jeffrey summarized the law piece. I'm not even frankly going to go there, whether there was actual legal traction, whether there's even merit, what's behind the curtain, what's really going on. I may sound a little cynical. Nixon was paranoid. That didn't make him wrong. I do smell a little bit of a rat here. LeVanna used the word suspicious, query, what is going on here really and truly, even if there are arguable legal merits to this. But to your question, they can't even get to the start line. Let me offer a different perspective there.
Okay.
They got to a start line,
yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And
24 operational legal cannabis shops.
Yeah.
24.
So just to offer a bit of a perspective here. And not at all to minimize what the practical implications might be to the very few cannabis dispensaries that were ready to open and that are impacted, at least for the short term, by this. again, not to minimize the implications of that for them, but I just like to offer this other perspective as things start to roll out. It's not like these other cards who were recently awarded that their provisional license is going to be taken back. They now are in the post selection application phase. And if you're just getting started, which a lot of them are with finding their funding, finding their leadership, finding their location, this should not, as they say in hockey, because that was my dream. Remember, that was my story. That's what caught your attention. Keep shooting till the buzzer sounds, and even after the buzzer sounds, keep shooting, because you never know what's going to happen with the shot clock, right? So
or video on demand, the VAR, video assisted referee in soccer. They've got this thing that's been going on, and you just got to keep playing. You're right.
And more importantly, let me also say this too, right? For those eyeing the impending opening of the full adult use round in New York in roughly 6 weeks, as I've said for years that I've been doing this, when is the best time to start to prepare for your license application? Yesterday.
Right.
And if it wasn't yesterday, then do it now. And so even if there is this TRO, and even if this does play out longer, this is a window of opportunity that you might appreciate, so that you can get your preliminary ducks in a row, so that when that portal opens, you are not chasing the front of the pack in terms of your preparedness to even sit down and take on this incredibly comprehensive process of applying for a license. I saw Don's reaction when I said recovering lawyer, so maybe you have a
no. This is why we have lawyers on this show.
Can I add to this, please?
Yeah, go ahead, LeVanna. Go ahead.
First,
can I welcome Charlie in, please? Because Charlie and I go back a few years, and it's Charlie Alovisetti from Vicente Cedarburg, and he's located here in Boston. And go ahead, Will. This is your cue. Hold up his book. He's got your book. He's got your book, Charlie. Is that an autograph copy? Is that an autograph copy? That's what I want to know.
No, it's not.
I'll stop on that. I just wanted to say I shot you an email, but I felt bad because I just had a fire drill. We just had someone shut down out in California today. Bit of a
oops.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a familiar story over the past 18 months, but
well,
so
you want to share? LeVanna is our California girl. She's from the Bay State area, not the Bay State area, the Bay Area. Sorry, I threw that state. Sorry, I'm in the Bay State. You're in the Bay Area. Okay, but you're in New York now. Charlie, what was the thing in California?
Well, I can't really talk about it, but
okay, nice tease, by the way.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, I guess the big picture issue is, right, when a company goes out of business,
right,
particularly with the way the value chain works in California, it creates ripple effects, right? Because people owe money to other people, and then once you dissolve, that's like, well, it's time to take your AR and write it down. So that's kind of
did everybody dirty.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of been the challenges that I've been dealing with, right? Because it leaves it's like the company goes away, but the messes it creates live on.
Right. The trickle down effect can last for years.
Jimmy, can I say a little bit about New York?
Ready, go.
So I grew up in Western New York, about 50 miles south of Buffalo. And most of my wonder years were spent in a small town called Salamanca. And Salamanca, named after Salamanca, Spain. And Salamanca is one of the only towns in the United States that's entirely on a Native American reservation. And the Native Americans in the Seneca Nation have gotten way ahead of New York. They've opened up at least 20 dispensaries in this small area. And it's an example of minimally regulated cannabis commerce. I went into a store. They didn't ask me for my ID. I asked for a pre-roll. They took out a big jar, dumped out a pre-roll, handed it to me. It's a great contrast with what I'm familiar with here in Massachusetts, with all the I would say perhaps over-regulation.
No,
I'm enrolled Northern Cheyenne, and one of my biggest missions in life has been to empower Native Americans to use our rights for sovereignty, which we don't much. My tribe's very poor, so they get to do that.
They should. They were here first. They were here first. You know, as much as I, know the history of the Pilgrims being from Massachusetts, last time I checked, they were here first.
On the res, there's tribal sovereignty.
and in New York, out in Long Island, it's was it Shinnecock, the Shinnecock Reservation? Yeah. Has anybody gone to that?
Another show. I'm planning to.
Yeah, no.
What Sherry was saying.
Yeah, I met some people when we were down there for CWCB that were Shinnecock, and I said, "Would you hire me to come down and do a story on you, please? Because I'd love to do that." Anyway, Charlie, what are you working on these days?
Let's see. A lot of kind of the restructuring stuff, which has been sort of a learning experience. It's a lot of contractual sort of negotiations because, there's no bankruptcy in cannabis.
Right.
So, that's kind of in the background, not that most things go to bankruptcy, but if you have the access to bankruptcy courts, it impacts the negotiations and because no one, everyone knows that there's no bankruptcy, I think there's heightened incentive to get a deal done because if you don't get a deal done, most likely, you're not getting anything.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the group up in Portland, Jacques Santucci, I think it's Opus Consulting.
Yeah.
They were involved with Ardent's receivership when they went bankrupt. And that was like the first time that they actually had a dispensary that went out in receivership. I know we did these interviews because I was here doing them. But it took about 18 months just to get to the point where they felt like they were comfortable bringing it to the court. So anyway,
it takes a while for those to get done, and then obviously the court and the commission need to bless the sale to the third party.
Yep.
There's a whole system in place to put the receiver there in quickly, but you can't necessarily sell it quickly. So you got to operate. Jacques was running it for a considerable period of time.
Right. Yeah. Well, again, it's you make it up as you go along when it's a new set of rules and regulations and laws, right, guys? I mean, this is one of the reasons why I rail against legalization. And no disrespect to the attorneys that are hearing this, okay? Legalization involves politicians and lawyers, which is going to be a challenge unto itself, right? It's built into it, okay? So decriminalization and descheduling is a huge win for this industry if they can get that done down in Washington, D.C. Will, as you look down at Washington, D.C. and the federal movement towards reform, are you confident at all that anything's going to get done?
Well, Jimmy, you asked me that question, I think the last time I was on, maybe
I know. It hasn't changed, has it?
And I said, I thought that the Banking Act was probably the best chance of moving forward. I'm going to say that again. I think the Banking Act has the best chance of moving forward.
Okay, good job. Sherry, what's your feeling about what's going on in D.C. with federal reform?
Well, I think you should be careful what you ask for when it comes to federal legalization of cannabis. Just as a refresher, I come from the pharmaceutical industry. I saw how that sausage was made and marketed. I saw how that lobby operates. And that's why I flipped the script and became an attorney and ended up suing the pharmaceutical industry for regulatory violations. So I have a different perspective on federal legalization, who that actually, there you go, who that actually empowers, if you will, who really does at the end of the day truly benefit in the larger scheme from that. I personally am an advocate for, craft and smaller operations. And let's go back to the previous panel about, what about the distressed farmers? What about women? What about minority-owned businesses? I'd like to see them thrive and not get either cannibalized or otherwise gobbled up by federal legalization. As a packaging and labeling person, I'm a bit of a regulatory nerd, and I've seen and prosecuted thousands of labels. I kind of know, you know, how to commercialize these products and what needs to go on the labels and all of that. You know, I don't know. Ask yourself, you know, do you want universal? Is that going to help with your brand? You know, I think that is a very, it's 5:23. I've talked about it for 47 seconds. I think that is a 47-hour conversation about federal legalization. I think it's a very complex, but I caution, you know, careful what you ask for, and be really practical and thoughtful about what are the real implications of that for your business, and ask yourself, who's really behind this? Who's waiting in the wings right now? Pharma. Oh, did I say that out loud? Who's waiting?
Yes, you did.
Big ag.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned them, because this week Tilray ended up buying 8 microbreweries from Anheuser-Busch. And one of the interesting questions that we'd love to throw out at the different people on this show, because we get a great intelligent group of people to come on this show, even though I'm the host. And it has a lot to do with the fact that, what is it going to be if and when that ever happens? Is it big pharma? Is it big alcohol? Or is it big tobacco? Charlie, I'm going to ask you that question. Where do you think ultimately, what of those 3 arms are going to get more involved in the cannabis side than the other?
Oh, okay, I'm going to give a slight twist on an answer here, which is that I think that the Tilray deal is more, it's less alcohol going into cannabis than cannabis trying to get into alcohol, right? Yep. Which is, the investors in a lot of these Canadian companies got burned, and they, yep. Yeah, exactly. And a lot of these investors want out of cannabis yesterday. I mean, they can't get out because if you get out now, I mean, you're going to basically have to write the whole thing off, or you take a huge haircut. So they're trying to get into alcohol. I would say if you took the situation today, if you legalize today at a federal level, I think a lot of the big players would be pretty loath to actually enter the industry as it currently stands in a place like New York or California, where there's such a huge legacy market that they'd be competing with, that they wouldn't necessarily be able to compete with on price.
Yeah. So. Hey, isn't it amazing? This movement started, Colorado and Washington State were the first 2. California had the first medical in the 90s. The whole idea was, hey, we're going to legitimize this industry, and everybody's going to go legal. And it's going to be great because the weed's going to be tested. You're going to know exactly what you're going to have when you get in there. We haven't even talked about the testing lab controversy. We don't need to go there because that's a show for another day. That being said, I mean, who screwed this up? That's how I look at it. Who screwed this? Will, who screwed up this movement?
I'm not sure it's screwed up, Jimmy.
Okay.
I think in some places it's overregulated.
Yeah.
And that comes from the 80 years of prohibition, and it's tough to shed off that cloak. But I think we're getting to a point where folks understand that there is overregulation and that they may be backing off some. So at least it looks like that. I have my fingers crossed here in Massachusetts for that.
Right, and they're trying to do that in California, LeVanna, aren't they?
What? Yeah, they got to restructure everything because they did
unregulate, deregulate.
Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, the legacy market was pretty good for a lot of people for a long time, and it's good. It's never going to go away. And New York was a great example of how it was just the wild, wild west down there. Sherry, quick question, and LeVanna, you can answer this too, because I know you're both in the New York area. Has the storefront issue abated at all?
They doubled down.
What they have shut them down?
They doubled down.
Doubled down. Okay.
Yeah, like for example, out where I'm at, Coney Island has Zaza Island, this little booth that sells weed. And, they announced that they were going to enforce regulations. And before the season opened, they opened up a second booth out here. And I see that pattern everywhere. They've just doubled down. There's twice as many.
Yeah.
Bodega stores, Seshes, blah, blah, blah.
Sorry, LeVanna, I jumped over you. Sorry about that. Like I said from the beginning, no offense to Kansas, but we're not in Kansas anymore. We're in cannabis. And so, I mean, it's not for the weak at heart. It's a bit like whack-a-mole out here in New York with the illegal, but you know what? There is a legal market. There are, there's opportunities for people to participate in the legal market, and we have to let run your race and focus on your race as best you can, while the state gets some dollars to go after these illegal operations. I don't think it's ever going to go away, which is why, right, you got to focus on your own race, get yourself ready so that you can get your own bananas, right?
Yeah.
Say about why do monkeys climb trees, right? Go get your own bananas and get ready to get yours.
To add on to Sherry, what she was saying earlier about things, like the context that I feel like that you should have or could have put it in, is that this is the 10th largest in New York City. Forget about the state. New York City is the 10th largest market in the world in general. It's a bigger market than Texas. And it is the largest consumer market in the world. California is the largest producer. So the battle is going to be fierce. And also, to go back to the licensing issues we're talking about, and people should just be ready. I mean, we had in California, people were on provisional temporary licenses for over 2 years. And because it takes that much time to get up to code.
Yes.
That's really the next step. It's, you get a license, big deal. We'll try getting up to code, because that's where it gets complicated and hard.
You need consultants and regulatory people to help you to navigate that really treacherous course. And I thank you for adding that context and content to my original comment. Look, when I said, is anybody really shocked and awed? Not only is it not Kansas, it's cannabis. It's the New York market. And number one, it's the most litigious place on the planet. Why? Because where there's money, there's madness. And there's a lot of money at stake in New York, right? So that's why we're seeing what we're seeing going on.
Fantastic. Hey, you know what, guys? And Will and Charlie, I had questions about the new regulations that Massachusetts has kind of adopted here and moving forward, but that's going to be another show for another day. Because once we start getting into host community agreements, social equity funds, and the distribution of taxes and all that neat stuff that's part of the industry, we could be here for another hour. So unfortunately, we will have to postpone that, but I definitely will have at least a half hour designated and delegated to the new laws in Massachusetts. So
happy to come back and talk about that, Jimmy.
What's that?
I'm happy to come back and talk about that.
Thank you. That's why we love you so much, Will. You really are great. You've been pretty much in every location where we've been, and which I really appreciate. You know that.
Well, it was an honor to share the screen with all of you and this time together. Thank you all so much.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Sherry.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
One more. Hey, give a plug to your book now. Come on. What's the name of the book? Sell it.
Well, I mean, it's the perfect stocking stuffer, I would say, as we head into the fall. It's let's see, I was going to say it's called The Cannabis Business. It's available wherever books are sold online, but probably Amazon. It's actually cheaper if you buy it directly from Rutledge.
There you go. Well, then that's a nice little tip too. All right, you three, thank you so much for joining us. We've got our last half hour coming up, and we've got Nick Richards coming on from Colorado and Greenspoon Martyr, and Jake Kelinson from New Jersey. So we got kind of like a young person and a veteran, and I think this will be an interesting half hour. So don't go away. We'll have more Green Rush Live after this.
You would think that it is. However, there's quite a bit of debate right now in the accounting industry when it relates to cannabis with this exact question. I'm part of a few different networking groups that are solely accountants for cannabis companies. And there's been quite a bit of back and forth in those communities and discussion regarding whether 280E, if it went away, if administration legalized cannabis or took it off of Schedule 1, what would happen? And it could go either way right now. The debate is it can make the accountant's life much easier. That's what a lot of the inexperienced accountants are saying right now, it seems. Whereas the accountants that have been in this industry for a while and have gone through the same thing that happened with hemp a few years ago are saying that will make lives more difficult, because when hemp became declassified a while back, the accounting became more complicated.
The Vermont Cannabis Report is supported by another Green Mountain business, Canatrol, winner of High Times Best Dry Cure System. Check them out at canatrols.com. Sayegh Labs in Westfield is fast becoming the #1 testing lab for cannabis in Western Massachusetts. Sayegh understands the importance for accurate on-time test results for your product. That's why their current compliance panel turnaround time is less than 2 days. That's Sayegh Labs in Westfield. For more information, go to sayegh.com. And welcome back. We're in the home stretch of Green Rush Live on a Friday afternoon here at Pro Cannabis Media. Hi, everybody. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media and sometimes host of Green Rush Live. I'm joined with a guest host today, LeVanna Vassau. She is from California. She is our California correspondent for We Talk News, our weekly news show that follows this live show at 6 p.m. So you want to stay tuned to that too. And that is anchored by Elena Pinto. And I'm so proud. You know, my original vision, and Nick, I probably shared this with you a couple of years ago when we talked at MJ Biz, was to build.
We're talking visions?
Yeah. I wanted to build an army of multimedia journalists who will document the end of prohibition of cannabis in our time. And every Thursday with our news, I do it. We do it. We're doing a coast-to-coast roundup. We've got 14 correspondents. Everybody has 90 seconds to 2 minutes to tell us what's going on in their state. And I'm very proud of that. And Elena has just been, she is a network talent, people. Okay, I know talent. I know network talent. She's network talent. She worked in Boston at the Channel 7 channel here in Boston Independent, and ended up losing her job because she appeared as an extra in an Adam Sandler movie without asking permission from her bosses. And that's why the broadcast industry is in trouble, because the management that's in it, like every other media management group, have this blinders on. All they know is what they've done over the last 20, 30, 40 years. And media has changed. People's use of media has changed. And it's one of the reasons why I could actually build a little network myself. So anyway, Nick, he's from Green Spoon Barter. He's based in Colorado. Thank you so much, Nick. Great to see you again. Never a dull moment in Colorado, even beyond the weather, right?
Yeah, it's things are moving faster in Colorado in the industry. We're sort of I think the most advanced state as far as the marketplace is concerned, and we've seen I think 3 ups and downs now here in Colorado, and we're sort of starting to climb out of the 3rd real drop in the price of marijuana here. The weather has been crazy. We're dodging hail every other day here, and Jimmy, we got psychedelics right around the corner.
Yeah,
right?
well, that's a subject that I have actually written about it. I think the cannabis industry needs to get their thing passed and accepted and normalized before they move on to psychedelics. However, no one's going to listen to me.
Too late.
I know, that's exactly right. That's exactly how I feel. Exactly how I
It
feel.
has it has many of the same problems that the cannabis industry has. It's a Schedule 1 controlled substance,
Mhm.
and that just leads to a bunch of pain. There could be a good chance that it ends up a little differently because it is a lot more medical, I think, but many of the same issues is going to be present in that industry as well.
There you go. And Jake, you're right in the middle. You're in the Philadelphia area, right? Isn't that where you're practicing? Yep. And they have a medical program in Philadelphia. They've been trying to get adult use going in that state as far as getting it on the ballot and what have you. But you're also privy to what's going on next door to Pennsylvania in New Jersey.
That's kind of where my home base is in Jersey. We're much more on like the infancy stage than Colorado. I know Nick's probably been, like he said, through those ups and downs. We're still on that first up, right? So we're seeing a lot of positives, especially in comparison to New York. But yes, like you said, I'm seeing like a 5-year trajectory, maybe 5 to 10 years, and then we're gonna hit that down slope. So
3 years.
3 years.
Okay. Yeah, you probably know more than me. So, yeah.
No, he does know.
Jimmy, it's always this interesting moment when I'm counseling new clients in new spaces, and they've got their money guy there, and he's got his pro forma that shows them ruling the world in a matter of 3 months. And I have to say, guys, the industry's pretty tough, actually. I think we should try to manage under a principle of breaking even. And frankly, you would be awesome if you could do that. And if you kill it, more power to you. But I tend to piss those finance guys off.
It's not going to happen overnight. LeVanna, I'm sure you have something to add or even a question for these two guys. Go ahead.
I was just laughing about that. I mean, yeah, it's funny to watch people. They see the numbers. I mean, the numbers that cannabis generates have nothing to do with profits or the bottom line, period.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a shame because there's an awful lot of cash being thrown around. And, a lot of people never get enough of that. There's a big evil there built into greed with money. But most of the people I know in the cannabis industry, and you guys, both you guys, actually, all three of you know this. I think you do. The passion of the people that are in the industry itself believe so much that they're changing the world, that they're impacting people's lives on a positive level by enlightening them about the medicinal aspects of this plant more than anything else. And a lot of them, while they need to make a living, still are much more concerned about helping people than making a dollar.
That's in the medical sense, but once it goes rec, that all goes out the window.
I hate that word. I hate that word. Recreational should not be. It's adult use cannabis and medicinal cannabis. That's the name of the plant. Those are the two ways to distinguish the two. And then you've got hemp with 0.3%. And the reason why I don't like that word recreational is do you take Robitussin recreationally? Do you take Mucinex recreationally? Because both of those products get you high.
Well, in California,
Jimmy, I didn't know that.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
California, when they did
gets you high?
they threw out the medical program completely. It was just coupled together, and it didn't exist anymore. And then it took years for them to get it back. Now it's like Prop 36, I think, or something. They finally got it back, but it just literally disappeared.
There you go.
On the other side of that is, it's very hard to be profitable in the medical only market. And that's the reality of it. Unless you're in a monopoly state like Florida, which doesn't seem fair either. So, it's tough.
Right. No. Jake, what's your feeling about that?
Yeah, no, I was just going to touch on, I do agree with you that people in this industry want to make a difference, right? But I think, and Nick, you can tell me about your experiences, but there are some predators out there that prey on these people that, they might be social equity applicants or what have you, where they want to help people and they know their product. If they're a cultivator, they know how to grow, whatever it may be, but they don't have access to capital, right? Their family comes from low income. They've been, incarcerated for cannabis, what have you. And the only way that they can move their business along is to, find capital. And half the time these people are just preying on just to make money. So, I mean, it does go hand in hand, but
Jake, I'll say this, in the tax world, we see the same failed arguments that were failed from inception in 2012 and in 2014 and in the early days of all these states. In every new state, there's a whole industry there peddling those same failed arguments, and the industry falls for it because it's attractive. And I spend a lot of time telling people, no, that doesn't work, guys. That doesn't work. We learned that lesson in California and Colorado and Nevada and Arizona and every other place, right? And you're right. There's a lot of that out there.
Did Minnesota get it right, Nick? So far?
I don't know. My partner David Standa would be the one to talk about Minnesota. And I think the writing's still yet to be seen there, I think, in a lot of ways.
Well, but they've gotten rid of the individual states and towns who can opt out, although I'm starting to see that there's a loophole that they're going to try and figure out a way to ban it from. Duluth, I think, is one of the cities that they're trying to ban it from. Jake, I don't know how privy you are to what happened in Minnesota. It's the 23rd legal state. The governor's behind it.
Right.
They have, I think, they have allowed home grow. There's a lot of things, a lot of policies and details in the law that are still not available in Washington State, or Colorado just got delivery. Am I right, Nick?
That's right.
That's right.
And it's not working. It's not working.
New Jersey there too. New Jersey
because you might want to get it delivered to your home, but on your way home from work, you're going to pass 35 dispensaries, and you could just swing in and get what you want on the way home. There are more dispensaries than Starbucks here in Colorado, so no lack of places to stop.
But there's not more dispensaries than liquor stores, right?
No, I think there are.
Really? I'd love to hear that stat, because I know.
LeVanna, is that right? Do you have that stat?
I don't have the stat, but just from going to Colorado, it seemed like every block, and even in the tiniest towns, had a dispensary next to a bar, next to a tattoo shop. It's like a thing there.
Just got it all covered, right?
Right. And now they're blending. I know they're blending. I know people are blending out there with the little powders and the liquid THC. By the way, I can definitely recommend the chill product that has THC in it, and you put it in a little smoothie, and guess what?
Yeah.
You're high.
It's my theory as to why Anheuser-Busch purchased those. They're looking for shelf space, because shelf space is one of the most hardest things to get in the drink industry. And what do you think they're going to do with all that moldy boof and all this like overstock of bud? They're going to turn it into nanofied powdered drinks. Drinks are going to be a much easier sell to a lot of people, because at the end of the day, smoke is hard to smoke. It's not like alcohol, because it bothers people. It floats into the air, and that's one of the biggest reasons why it's hard to integrate it into being the same as weed. And also, people just want to get high. Their tolerances are building up. So Coca-Cola and Pepsi are already way ahead of the drink thing. That is going to be a bit next wave of a huge market space, is drinks. So that's my personal theory. The earlier lawyer was saying he thinks the cannabis businesses in Canada are trying to get out of cannabis, and I'm thinking they're looking ahead and they're trying to get shelf space and integrate.
Yeah, Jimmy, I think we talked about this too. A lot of people are shifting from flower to beverages or edibles, and I think we talked about
microdosing, a little spritz under your tongue with Yellow Labs is my go-to product. And I agree with you. Go ahead, Jake. I'm sorry I interrupted.
No, that's all I had. I just want to, I think there's actual stats somewhere, but I think there's a huge shift from the past decade from flower.
It happened during COVID, because people stopped smoking, but lots of people started using cannabis again. And there's the soccer moms market, all those markets. A lot of people can't just smoke weed because they got teenage kids that are going to get into their weed or whatever. And people's tolerances are building up, and they want to be high all day at work. And you can't.
And there's just so many more options now.
Yeah.
I mean, 10 years ago, there was a lot of weed and a couple different edibles and a couple different vape brands, and that was about it. Now you go into a dispensary and man, it's 7-Eleven, right? We're shopping.
Right. It is overwhelming.
And it's again about bio waste and using up all of the stuff.
Yeah.
I'm talking about, what are you going to do with all that moldy bud? You can't, there's only so much flour you can get to market, especially with testing, but people don't want to trash it as lost. They're not going to be able to export it to New York forever, but you could blast it and turn it into nanofied.
Well, and LeVanna, I think when InBev bought a cannabis brand, what was that, 3, 4, 5 years ago? InBev is a big alcohol company. They bought some cannabis brands. Now we see and I remember when that happened, I think one of the predictions was cannabis is going to get so big, it's going to buy the liquor brands. Mm-hmm. And now we see that happening, right? So it's quite interesting.
And the stats are there. Less people drinking, less people doing, I work in nightclubs too. And I was warning everybody here in New York, because I saw it in California. I'm like, you guys got to come up with some other drinks, because your bars are going to get hit. People are going to be drinking a lot less alcohol once weed's legal and they don't have to, you know what I mean? I quit drinking 4 years ago. And the bartenders are so sad because people come to the parties for the music still, but nobody's buying alcohol. Right. So, I'm always telling them, get some CBD drinks, get some kind of cocktails that I can drink here. I'll spend money at the bar, but I'm not buying alcohol. And I don't want a Shirley Temple.
Speaking of the bar scene. Yeah, Jimmy. No, I was going to mention consumption lounges and what we thought about that.
They cannot look. California's got a few. Nevada's going to open up some in the fall, but in this state, Massachusetts, they continue to talk about. I love it when people are clueless about the plant and how it's used and how people use it, and they're making up the rules about social consumption. Again, makes no sense to me. But I will two things. One is, are you guys familiar with the term California sober?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. All right. Just what Jake is not. LeVanna, go ahead. Explain it to Jake, because I got it. Go ahead.
It's where you don't drink, but you do shrooms and weed.
Okay.
Now they're adding ketamine to that.
So that's I love California. Let's go back to smoking weed, because originally that's the only way you could titrate, the only way you could actually enjoy it or take it in for whatever ails you, if you will, if you have a medical card. And the other word for fun, I don't understand how they have that word attached to cannabis, because it's still a medicine. Even the people that go to the adult use stores and buy the highest percentage of THC because they think that's going to get them the highest, okay, they're clueless. It's the terpenes that steer it, that dictate what percentage of the THC is going to impact your little brain. Okay, that's just how this plant works. And by the way, what works for you may not work for me. And yet, despite all these options, 49% of the cannabis industry is still flower. Mm-hmm. It's still flower.
That's gonna stay. The people who love flower are gonna still want flower. But the rest of the industry is going to continue to expand, and be more accessible for people who don't want to smoke. But there will always be the cultural flower out there that is what the industry is really all about, and that the really great flower then drives those other products. And we see that more and more when the markets become more and more sophisticated. Things like vapes and gummies and things like that need to be more like flower. The just generic gummy that just tastes like a piece of candy and doesn't have any marijuana flavor in it at all. That's not the one the kids want these days. The one the kids want is the one with the terpenes that actually tastes like a sophisticated marijuana product. And same thing with the vapes too. People don't want just the straight flavorless THC vapes. They want the one that tastes as close to flower as they can get.
I got to say though, the New York market dictating everything, because it's the biggest consumer market by far than anywhere. It will dictate the market needs. And having worked in a dispensary for about a year out here, people do want, like, surprisingly, because they want to smoke in their apartments and not smell stuff up.
Yeah.
There is actually going to be a need. I laughed it so hard at that when they were inventing the, terpless, smellless weed, but there will be a market for that, and it will be significant because it's going to come out of places like New York where people want to smoke in their apartment.
And there's flavored vapes out there too that are quite popular.
Right. Absolutely. But that's the biggest issue now in Minnesota, because they're talking about banning public smoking of cannabis. And most states that are legal, most, not all, most, will allow you to light up in a designated public smoking area, because there are quite a few designated public smoking areas around airports, bus terminals, that sort of thing. So you can light up there. A lot of people are still, they don't like the smell. I don't like cigar smell, and I don't like cigarette smell. Okay. And it turns me off completely. And yet, what do you think? I enjoy the cannabis smell.
Jimmy, I think that's a bunch of crap. Here's why. Behind me here is northern Colorado, and about 10 miles that way are cattle feed yards, like just as far as the eye can see. And they just smell worse than anything you ever experienced in life. And the very same people that say they hate the smell of marijuana are the ones that own those cattle feed yards here in Colorado.
That's actually very
I think that is just
County.
crap. Complete crap. I don't like the way McDonald's smells when I drive by. It gives me a sore stomach. I would much prefer to be next to a marijuana producer than a Burger King or a McDonald's or anything like that.
Yeah. New Jersey.
So I just hate that argument. That argument makes me really get off.
I know. That's why I wanted to bring it up. I knew I'd get a rise out of you. Jake, what is the law about public smoking of cannabis in New Jersey that doesn't even have home grow yet?
In New Jersey?
Yeah.
It's in your private residence.
Yeah. Okay. And of course, if you have a landlord who's banned it, you still got to go outside. You know, it's funny though, and Jake, you can't relate to this, but I know Nick and I can. And LeVanna, maybe, for years, it was illegal. So we couldn't smoke it in public. Oh, but we managed, didn't we? We always found an alley or behind a building or in the car, in the parked car, or in the driving car. We'll talk about that some other time. But the point is, if you want to imbibe, if you want to titrate, if you want to take in some cannabis, you'll find a way because you've got the will to do it, right?
I got a ticket for smoking in Union Square in New York in February.
How much?
Really?
I have a court case for
this
it.
year, huh?
How much was it, LeVanna? How much was the ticket?
$50.
Crazy.
Right. So it's like a parking ticket.
But it's like a criminal. I have a court date for it.
Mm-hmm.
Really? So it's not a misdemeanor?
In front of like 3 weed vendors. And I didn't know because I'm from California. And I told them, I put it out right away. I was like, I didn't know. Yeah, how could I know with like this whole place? So people selling everything here, but they insisted on giving me the ticket.
I think we have two attorneys with us that will remind us that ignorance of the law is not an excuse, right?
True. And Jimmy, I don't think there's any specific law that says you can smoke it in public. I think that's just most states are just looking the other way.
And the cigarette, no cigarette smoking is in place.
Right.
So it's actually that's really where it's like, well, like there's some cities like San Francisco is a smoke-free city. You're not supposed to smoke cigarettes within 50 feet of any buildings, you know, so they're not going to be like, oh, except weed, unless it's a medical, then you have the right to consume your medicine.
Right.
Did you guys see this in New York, this farmers markets that they're going to open up?
Yeah, they opened it up this week in New Paltz.
What are they going to do with, people out in the streets doing, that? It's just, who knows?
It's an awful lot of tickets if they want to write them. But I've talked to law enforcement people. They don't want to spend any time enforcing the existing laws in a legal state because it takes them away from real crime when you get right down to it. And even the cops know it. They know it. They're human too. There
are still some people out there though, Jimmy, that want to kick that dog. We see that all the time. It's still a wedge issue, and there's still a lot of politics around it. And there are people in positions of power that want to hurt people on the cannabis side of the aisle.
Right.
And it's still out there.
I agree. I get it. I totally get it. And it's a transitional time is really what's going on. This is the first time that it's become, dare I say, mainstream because everybody has an opinion about this plan. Everybody. It's one of the reasons why I want a national talk show in cannabis, but that is not going to happen just yet. We'll see. We'll see how it all works. Hey, Nick and Jake, so enjoyed talking to both you. LeVanna, it was a great. There were different people in here all the time with different feelings and opinions and where they're from. I mean, I really enjoyed. I hope and I appreciate you helping me out.
Jimmy, let me say one. LeVanna, can I say
whatever you want, Nick? I have always said you need your own show. Go ahead.
One thing, 471C is something that everyone in the industry needs to know about and be in a position to make a decision about. It is the single most important thing in the cannabis industry right now. And it is the difference between failure and success for many, many, many cannabis companies. And I see LeVanna writing it down. It is so important. It's
okay. What is it? Explain it to people.
Let me say it again. 471C. It is an accounting method that was first created on the 2017 TCJA bill that lowered tax rates for a lot of companies. And it is a new inventory method that says that the inventory rules do not apply. Those rules are the rules that make it so that cannabis companies cannot put additional costs into cost of goods sold. And under 471C, those rules do not apply, Jimmy. There's still risk there. There's still uncertainty there, but every single cannabis company needs to understand it and needs to make an intelligent decision about whether they want to take those risks or not. And I guarantee, Jimmy, they all do.
You're talking about how you can't write off expenses?
Yes, exactly.
I want to hear more about that.
280E is what I'm talking about. So write it down. 471C.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Hugely important.
Yeah. People and everyone getting into cannabis new licenses, they don't get it. You know, but creating staffing agencies in new states can really help with that.
Maybe 471C helps a lot more, a lot less risk there. Love to have that conversation on another time, Jimmy.
Hey, actually, Nick, I'm going to follow up with you because even though we can't air public service announcements on traditional media, I'm not traditional media. And I think explaining what 471C is would be a great addition to sharing with our audience. So I'm going to follow. It's Dina, isn't it? The person I was talking, Dina?
Yes, Dina on my team. That's right. And Jimmy, I'm presenting it to the AICPA in Boston next week. It's not some fringe weird thing. It is mainstream, big time stuff. So really happy to put that out there and would love to talk to you about it.
That's huge.
And more importantly, I've got a few friends in the Boston media market, Nick, that I'm going to enlighten about this conference. And because it is news and they're business reporters, you know, that sort of thing. It'll give me another excuse to try and actually talk to the people who completely put me aside. They ghosted me. That's what we call it now, right?
Jimmy, get your spritzer and come on by and let's hang out.
You got it, man. Absolutely. I'll be doing, I definitely will check. We'll be in touch. And Jake, how do people get to you if they want you in the Philadelphia area?
You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. You know, Jake Kelinson. Firm is Capehart Scatcherd. We're in Mount Laurel. Find me online.
There you go. What exit? Oh, God, I couldn't help. I had to do that. All right. LeVanna, you were awesome. I love having you part of our team here. I can't be more open about that. So thank you.
Let me plug myself. I got a weekly FM radio show on 89.5 FM, KZCT Vallejo, every week from 3 to 6 p.m. Been doing it for 5 years. It's dope. And I also have a YouTube channel where I do interviews and stuff called The Bay Sesh.
The Bay Sesh with LeVanna Vassau. Don't miss it. Nick Richards, Jay Kelinson, LeVanna, thank you so much. Dan French, as usual, saves the day again. He's our video director. And a reminder, coming up right after I say goodnight is We Talk News for this week, anchored by Elena Pinto. So for now, remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.
Coming up on We Talk News this week, New York stops the licensing process in the same week they open a legal growers market. And Tilray acquires 8 beer and beverage brands from Anheuser-Busch. A former FDA regulator is now predicting rescheduling this year. How does Schedule 3 sound? And New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu changes his cannabis tune about legalization, while Colorado introduces the first online order ahead and pay sales option for licensed dispensaries. All that and more on We Talk News with Elena Pinto next.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
everyone, welcome to Weed Talk News, Pro Cannabis Media's weekly news roundup of the past week's cannabis news. I'm Elena Pinto, and there's a lot of news this week, from merger and acquisitions to fraud and lawsuits to a complete turnaround from the New Hampshire governor. First, we start in New York, where the Empire State continues to show the world how not to start an adult use market, even with the best intentions. Regulators there have called on a moratorium on issuing any more licenses in the same week. And our New York correspondent is Pam Schmiel, and she has this plus more in the Empire State Cannabis Report.
Thank you, Elena. I'm Pam Schmiel, host of the Mary Jane Society podcast with the New York Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. More trouble for New York's cannabis rollout. In case you didn't know, New York is trying to implement a social equity program that gives minorities and nonviolent drug offenders a first crack at opening dispensaries before the large multi-state operators come into the marketplace. Veterans also fall under this social equity program, but they claim that they have been unconstitutionally left out of New York's cannabis program, and they filed a lawsuit with the state. A judge immediately halted all licensing processing until he could review the case. The lawsuit will have a devastating ripple effect and could cripple New York's cannabis program if it isn't resolved swiftly. The situation is devastating to farmers and extractors who are still trying to sell their overstock from last harvest due to New York's slow rollout. And some are speculating that the judge will kick the can down the road and suggest the veterans apply with the general public when those applications come out in about 60 days. The bottom line is the judge needs to decide if the Office of Cannabis Management broke the law by discriminating against the veterans. You can bet the illegal operators are having a party tonight. That's this week's New York Cannabis Report. I'm Pam Schmiel for Weed Talk News.
A perfect example of how not to introduce a legal adult use market in a state is now on display in Virginia. On the first day of July this year, the law and regulations surrounding the industrial hemp marketplace were updated there. Federally, hemp is defined as a cannabis-created product with no more than 0.3% THC. Now in Virginia, that standard is set. However, there is a clause in the new regulations that exposes how lawmakers just don't understand human behavior or the cannabinoid makeup of the plant. At the same time, lawmakers were trying to clarify the rules around hemp-derived products. They've opened the door for an industrial hemp marketplace. While the hemp definition of 0.3% THC is pretty clear, the Virginia law also sets a 2 milligram limit on each product with THC. That legal adult use product must have a 25-to-1 ratio of CBD to THC. So, according to lawyer Eric Postow from Holland Law Partners in Virginia, this means you could have a product with 2,500 milligrams of CBD to 100 milligrams of THC. Manufacturers might like these high ratio products, but the creation of such goes against the whole THC and hemp cannabis debate. Hemp was originally defined by the Farm Bill in 2018 as limiting THC to 0.3%. It still is, but no one involved with any federal policy making understood the interaction of the hundreds of cannabinoids present in the cannabis plant and how they work together. There are plenty of examples of injustices in the cannabis space. Some are more well-known than others, even with the recent reform movement that now has 23 states legalizing the plant and making it legally available to more than half of the adults over 21. There are still some states who don't understand that medicinal impact on patients, even in legal states. Our Arizona correspondent, Karen Black, is going to tell us about one patient in Arizona that is really getting railroaded by law enforcement in the legal state.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Could you imagine being deported to a country you haven't lived in for nearly 50 years? That could be the fate of Arizona medical marijuana patient Dennis Mahick of Peoria, a Serbian refugee. He faces a deportation hearing August 17th, stemming from a 2012 arrest for having 5 plants above the legal limit of 12 per cardholder. Originally a Class 6 felony, the charge was downgraded to a misdemeanor after Mahick served a year's probation. However, somehow ICE and DHS got involved and are inexplicably treating his conviction as a drug trafficking crime. Stay tuned to see how this case unfolds. The city of Scottsdale recently dissed Harvest True Leaves' drive-through dreams. The Planning and Zoning Commission dealt the company a double whammy by denying its requests to amend a zoning ordinance and its conditional use permit to allow drive-through dispensary services at one of its Scottsdale locations. Arizona's largest operator plans to take up the issue with the Scottsdale City Council. There's another place in Arizona to smoke them if you've got them. The Stoned Cafe and Event Center opened August 5th in Tucson. The 3,500 square foot venue offers a monthly membership plan, welcomes walk-ins, and is available to rent. Patrons can BYOC or order delivery from local dispensaries. And unfortunately, you may not want to eat them if you've got them. Nirvana Center's Cloud9 grape gummies were recently called for potential salmonella contamination. If you have them, you may want to take them back or throw them out. That's this week's Arizona Cannabis Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting, reporting for Weed Talk News.
One of the most dominant multi-state operators in cannabis is Trulieve. Based in Florida, they are the #1 dispensary chain in that state that has over 850,000 registered medical patients. Recently, they've been in the news for all the wrong reasons, including shutting down their entire Massachusetts operations and the death of one of its employees from unsafe working conditions. Well, now, after an internal audit of their operation finances for their quarterly reports, they discovered that their former CFO, Alex D'Amico, helped himself to over $350,000 in unapproved personal business expenses before he resigned in June. He has not paid them back yet because they just discovered the discrepancy while preparing their report. But meanwhile, Tilray has to do regular reports as a publicly traded stock as well. And part of their disclosures in this quarter was the acquisition of a number of craft beer breweries. 3 of those breweries are based in Oregon, and Marianne Corsagi has more on that and a big oops by the state's cannabis regulatory group.
I'm Marianne from Alibi with this week's Oregon Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Again, the cannabis regulators in Oregon, the OLCC, made news this week. The new headquarters, which the agency had already overpaid for, is now projected to cost double initial estimates. This has resulted in a decision to move office staff to the state capital of Salem once the current headquarters is closed down. Many staff now work remotely, so the impact of this on staff is yet to be determined. The impact on taxpayers, however, is over $80 million of additional spending. Secondly, embattled dispensary chain LaModa is again in the news. This time, the owner, Aaron Mitchell, is in dispute with the neighbor sushi restaurant over a disconnected sewer line. The parties are suing each other for damages. And finally, Tilray purchased a number of craft beverage brands, including 3 based in Oregon. Tilray will triple its beer sales volume and be ranked 5th amongst U.S. craft brewers after this deal closes. That'll do it for the Oregon Report this week. I'm Marianne with Alibi for Weed Talk News.
In New Hampshire, their governor, Chris Sununu, is now proposing a plan that he will sign if presented to him to legalize the adult use sales of cannabis. For years, though, Sununu has been a stout prohibitionist of the plant medicine. And even though his state has a medical program, all attempts to add adult use to that program have failed in their state Congress. Now, another committee made up of politicians will be formed to take a look at the governor's plan. They are the only state in New England that does not allow adults to purchase cannabis for their own use. But guess which state has the most sales of cannabis in New England? It's Massachusetts. In this week's Bay State Cannabis Report, PCM founder Jimmy Young tells us about a journalist who has been banned from future committee meetings. Here's PCM founder Jimmy Young with the Bay State Cannabis Report, sponsored by CNA Stores.
Thanks, Elena. I'm Jimmy Young, founder of Pro Cannabis Media, and this is the Bay State Cannabis Report, sponsored by CNA Stores. Now, the media is just not as respected as it used to be now that the consumers can post content and opinions anonymously all over social media. One local independent journalist who has made a number of appearances on Pro Cannabis Media programs, Grant Smith Ellis, well, he's been banned from any future Cannabis Control Commission meetings. The reason he was told was that his testimony before the state legislature on the oversights of the commission ruffled some feathers. Now, the commission is already doing damage control from a description of their work as a crisis by their head commissioner, Shannon O'Brien. Now, they're banning the most dedicated independent journalist who's been covering their meetings for 4 years. I mean, that's just not fair. It's unjust and frankly unconstitutional under that First Amendment. We hope the two sides can certainly get together to figure out how to live amicably in the future. Once again, that commission is reporting that Massachusetts set another sales record with $138 million of adult use weed sold in July. Now add in the $18.7 million of medical sales and you have a record total of $154 million in July. This week, that same commission has made some changes to the current laws and framework, giving them more power over the controversial host community agreements and the social equity dispersion of funds and licenses. Now, they're all hoping these changes will be made to make it easier for those most impacted by the failed war on drugs an opportunity to get into the business a lot easier. The details and review of those changes were released by the law firm Burns & Levinson, and a link will be shared on Pro Cannabis Media social media outlets. That's this week's Bay State Cannabis Report, sponsored by CNA Stores. I'm PCM founder Jimmy Young reporting for Weed Talk News.
Live from the Summit Lounge is supported by CNA Stores in Massachusetts, a veteran-owned and family-operated dispensary in Amesbury and Haverhill. It has the best selection in the state and a dedication to the community north of Boston.
Tilray is a publicly traded cannabis company that has now acquired 8 craft breweries around the country. Well, what impact did that have on its stock this week? Doug Miller from High on Wall Street has this week's cannabis stock report.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's cannabis stock report for Weed Talk News. Tilray is adding to its alcohol portfolio and buying 8 Anheuser-Busch beverage brands for $85 million. The 8 brands are Blue Point Brewing Company, Breckenridge Brewery, Red Hook Brewery, Shock Top, 10 Barrel Brewing Company, Widmer Brothers Brewing, Highball Energy, Square Mile Cider Company. So now let's look at the stock chart and see how this has affected it, because it looks like it topped out with this news and it wants to pull back. So watch for that dip. And that's this week's cannabis stock report. Reporting for Weed Talk News, I'm Doug Miller.
New England is fast becoming a hotbed for cannabis sales as 3 states set sales records in July. That includes one of the newest ones, Connecticut. Angie Seifert has our cannabis report from the state.
Angie Seifert from Skip Intro Advisors with the Connecticut Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Connecticut cannabis users bought 23.6 million in cannabis products over the month of July, an overall decrease in sales compared to the previous month. Though adult use sales increased marginally from 12.5 million in June to 13 million in July, medical cannabis sales decreased from 11.4 million in June to 10.6 million in July. The number of adult use products sold also increased, and medical cannabis products also decreased, all in line with sales. The majority of those sales, 52%, was flower. Vapes were second, making up 31%, and edibles 11%. Hang tight, Connecticut, the decrease is just a blip. And let's just keep buying legal cannabis from dispensaries, and more will come. Speaking of more dispensaries, the Walgreens in Orange, Connecticut departed its home given an extremely high rate of theft. despite having several years left on its contract. Town officials asked Southern Connecticut Health and Wellness, a medical cannabis dispensary in Milford, about relocating to the former Walgreens instead of the former TD Bank site. But Southern Connecticut Health and Wellness did not want to assume the large amount of debt remaining on the Walgreens property, and its proposal for the former TD Bank site subsequently was approved by the Zoning Commission. Nice being a buyer, right? Doesn't happen often in the cannabis space. Additionally, C3 Industries, a Michigan-based operator with 21 retail stores, 6 cultivation and processing sites in 4 states, applied for a special permit and site plan approval to build a 72,000 square foot cultivation and processing facility in East Hartford. The $12 million project would create 70 jobs. East Hartford Mayor Michael Walsh said the C3 proposal was welcomed by officials as a new effort to revitalize the town's industrial areas. The town recently changed zoning rules to encourage cannabis businesses, and C3 facility would be the first. I'm Angie Seifert from Skip Intro Advisors with the Connecticut Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News.
Guess which state is allowing online sales of cannabis? Colorado. Designed to limit the amount of cash in stores, that state will allow online sales of cannabis at licensed dispensaries. You will still have to go to the dispensary to pick up your products, but the order and purchase can be done online as long as you have registered in advance. This sounds like curbside pickup in advance ordering that has been pretty vogue since the pandemic, but they have added the financial registration piece to ease cash exchanged on site. So now it's time for the Missouri Cannabis Report with Brandon Jones, sponsored by Baker Brands.
What's up, everybody? It's Brandon Jones with Big Green Distribution. It's the Missouri Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News, sponsored by Baker Brands, my boys. Yeah, my lead story comes today out of the St. Louis Dispatch, and they had 3 facilities actually shut down this last week. It was actually 2 weeks ago, a little bit. I didn't actually get to do my segment last week. So they had a lot of facilities, 3 in particular, shut down, but lots of SKUs that have been taken off the shelves in the last 2 weeks. And the biggest confusion is they haven't told any of the manufacturers or the companies what the actual issue is, what the specific problem was, and they're not giving them a time frame when they'll be able to give them an answer or be able to sell their products again. So you can understand, as a business, you produce a product, you send it through testing, it gets through testing, you think everything's okay, it gets shipped to the dispensary, and then they're like, oh, wait, we can't sell that, but we won't tell you why, won't tell you when, but good luck staying in business. So a lot of the littler dispensaries and brands, not the dispensaries, the littler brands are having difficulties. This is a big financial hit on a company that doesn't have a lot of SKUs. If they take 1 or 2 off, what are you supposed to sell as your product, and how long are you going to be on hold? So a lot of companies here right now are in a little bit of a scramble mode, not knowing what's going to go on and how they can produce and what they did wrong to make their product not pass. Other exciting news is actually all the events that are getting ready to happen. So August is kind of a little bit of a lull. There's a little bit of smaller events coming around here and there, but September is getting ready to go crazy again. You got Major Pack Expo taking over the T-Mobile Center. You got Smoky River taking over. Smoky River, they own the entire place. It's pretty crazy. But Paul Wall will be there. Juicy J will be at T-Mobile Center. So a lot of fun actual consumption events at concerts in Kansas City, which is pretty crazy for a guy that grew up here my whole life. Now seeing all this happening back to back to back, it's still crazy to me. So again, check out what's going on. Hopefully these brands can get some support and figure out some information so they can get their products back on the shelf, but make sure everything's safe to the consumer when it gets there. So I hope everybody can start making some money and serving patients again quickly. So I'm Brandon Jones with B Green Distribution for the Missouri Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Thanks again, everybody. Have a medicated and educated week. See you later.
Brandon Jones, Missouri Cannabis Report is brought to you by Baker Brands, a curated B2B marketplace for head shops and dispensaries.
Back in New England, in Vermont, that state continues to dig out and clean up from the historic flooding last week. And now some more bad news for the cannabis industry there. forget about the feds helping you out. The public information officer for the Small Business Administration is Carl Dombeck, and he explained what we already know. Because they are a federal agency, they have to follow federal law. Vermont growers and retailers who have a claim because of the flooding will now have to go to their state to plead their case. California, though, continues to be the biggest cannabis market in the United States, despite the fact that the industry is imploding over regulations. And LeVanna Vassau is our California correspondent, and she has our report this week.
I'm LeVanna Vassau reporting for PCM with this week's California report for Weed Talk News. In Humboldt County, the No on HCRI movement held a rally, and in Adelanto, a second mayor in a row has been sentenced for taking bribes from cannabis entrepreneurs. Up in the Emerald Triangle, there has been a lot of buzz coming from the local legacy community about an upcoming ballot measure called the Humboldt Cannabis Reform Initiative, also known as HCRI, which will be on the county's ballot on March 5th, 2024. A rally was held on August 9th at the Vets Park in Willow Creek to protest the measure. The No HCRI group says the ballot would add dozens of new, unworkable restrictions to all cannabis farmers in Humboldt, and according to the Humboldt Planning Department analysis, would have, quote, dire consequences for the industry if approved. The Los Angeles Times published an article on August 4th stating that Richard Allen Kerr, the former Adelanto mayor and Marine of 20 years, was sentenced to 14 months in federal prison in connection with taking bribes from cannabis interests. Back in February, the U.S. Attorney's Office, Central District of California, released a statement saying that Kerr has agreed to plead guilty to a federal criminal charge for accepting more than $57,000 in bribes and kickbacks in exchange for approving ordinances authorizing commercial marijuana activity within the city and ensuring his co-schemers obtained city licenses or permits for their commercial marijuana activities. The FBI investigated this matter. This comes just 1 year after the former mayor pro tem of Adelanto, Jeremiah Wright, was sentenced to 60 months in federal prison for accepting a $10,000 cash bribe from an undercover FBI agent posing as a cannabis entrepreneur, and for hiring a man to burn down his restaurant so he could fraudulently collect hundreds of thousands of dollars in insurance proceeds. That's this week's California Cannabis Report. I'm LeVanna Vassau from PCM reporting for Weed Talk News.
Now let's go north of the border where cannabis is legal, and the feds there continue to make changes. Following all of this is our Debbie Facey, and here's our Canadian Cannabis Report.
This is Debbie with Weed Talk News, your Canadian correspondent, with this week's Toke of the Week. What we have in Canada is Organigram has been granted the judicial review from Health Canada, allowing them to no longer have to ban the Jolt edibles that they were creating due to the unfair regulations when it comes to the concentrate allowance within each product at this moment in time. We also have Kronos Group, which was a facility in Winnipeg, and they were known for the fermentation of creating cannabinoids and THC products. They have decided to close their doors just due to personal and financial reasons, and that decision is going to be happening in the late August, beginning of September 2023. And last but not least, we have the OCS once again proposing a new POS system when it comes to creating an efficient way for us Canadians to create not only orders, but in order to fulfill the orders when it comes to product. That was already proposed in the beginning of August, and that is being rolled out at the end of August, beginning of September as well. This is Debbie, your Canadian correspondent, with this week's Toke. Peace.
And finally tonight, if you are applying to college, you might want to check out Northern Michigan University. They became the first state school to apply to use real cannabis plants in their science and plant chemistry programs. Real plants. Those programs have been in existence, however, since 2017. Now, if they've been teaching these programs, how in the world do you teach about a plant that you can't touch, sample, and research? Just asking. At least they won't have to use the University of Mississippi's weed. That school was the only one in the nation to legally grow the product for decades. Okay, there you have it. That's Weed Talk News for this week. I'm Elena Pinto, and remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly.
The Vermont Cannabis Report is supported by another Green Mountain business, Canatrol, winner of High Times Best Dry Cure System. Check them out at canatrols.com.
We are a cultivation through to consumption lifestyle brand for the cannabis industry. Of course, the crown jewel in our product line is the Armoire home grow system. So now with Green Goddess Supply, we can take you everywhere from growing it in the armoire right through to storing it, consuming it, rolling it, storing it, you name it, A to Z. Our goal is to enable everybody and anybody anywhere to be able to produce their own organic flower quickly, easily, discreetly, and inexpensively.
You would think that it is. However, there's quite a bit of debate right now in the accounting industry when it relates to cannabis with this exact question. I'm part of a few different networking groups that are solely accountants for cannabis companies. And there's been quite a bit of back and forth in those communities and discussion regarding whether 280E, if it went away, if the administration legalized cannabis or took it off of Schedule 1, what would happen? And it could go either way right now. The debate is it can make the accountant's life much easier. That's what a lot of the inexperienced accountants are saying right now, it seems, whereas the accountants that have been in this industry for a while and have gone through the same thing that happened with hemp a few years ago are saying that it actually will make lives more difficult, because when hemp became declassified a while back, the accounting became more complicated.
Sayegh Labs in Westfield is fast becoming the #1 testing lab for cannabis in Western Massachusetts. Sayegh understands the importance for accurate on-time test results for your product. That's why their current compliance panel turnaround time is less than 2 days. That's Sayegh Labs in Westfield. For more information, go to sayegh.com. The Vermont Cannabis Report is supported by another Green Mountain business, Canatrol, winner of High Times Best Dry Cure System. Check them out at canatrols.com.